Well, welcome to Everyday Torah. My name is Traver, and it is my joy to have Kisha Gallagher with us. And Kisha and I have not actually met, but I feel a bit like I know you through your writing, Kisha. So I don't even know how long your website's been around. It's called Grace and Torah, so graceandtorah.net. And one of the things I was real interested in at the time, and I still am, is what does the Torah have to say about the role of men, the role of women, the relationship? And I found a whole series. It looks like, oh gosh, it's like 13 little parts on it might be on the role of, it's all on the role of women. So I'm just curious, Kisha, how long ago did you write that?
I think I began that in 2013 or 14. I actually started the blog in 2012. So that first one could have possibly come out around that time. I don't even really remember. But it's been a passion of mine, like it has been yours, because I want to see us functioning well and healthy, because that's the foundation of Israel, is marriages, families.
Oh yeah, for sure. I 100% agree. And I want to get better at it. So what I will do is, because your blog posts were so helpful to me, I will want to put the link down below for everybody. So if you want to go read that, there's some wonderful information in there. But before we get too far into it, Kisha, it would be helpful for my listeners to know a little bit about you. I know you've been a Christian a long time, but at some point you discovered that the Torah was relevant for Christian living. What was that process like for you?
Oh, it was such a battle. Like I think it is for most Christians, once you start realizing that the instructions of God are still valid today, all of them, and they are good. They're not bondage, and that they actually bring life and restoration to every area of your life, because it does deal with every area of life. And so in those beginning years, it was just a struggle. I had to struggle with my background. I was raised Baptist. And so most of the theology I had to work through came from that avenue, and just work through it. And I felt like I was going crazy half the time. I had people tell me I was crazy. My parents were totally concerned for me. They really thought that I was going to deny Yeshua, or Jesus at that time. And that wasn't it at all. I just really wanted to do what Jesus did. I wanted to walk the way he walked. Mm-hmm. And once they understood that I wasn't going to abandon my first love, then it was okay. And then they started studying themselves. And so it wasn't but a couple of years later, my parents also, we call it sort of crossing over, because there's not a real way to describe it, I think, fully. Mm-hmm. And then some other family, but we have some that still haven't. I mean, and some that will join us for maybe a Passover Seder, or another celebration, and they know that we love them. We know that we haven't abandoned them, and we haven't abandoned the Lord. And so somehow we make it work, but it was very tumultuous for those early years, for sure.
Yeah, it was actually pretty hard for me too. I think part of it is my own struggle to know if what I was doing was right, because I don't think any of us want to, fall into any type of heresy. So I think once I got over that, I think I went through some years of, I didn't quite understand what was the difference between Bible and Judaism. And so I would get a lot of those enmeshed together. And then I never, ever struggled with the idea that I was always saved by grace through faith. I'm wondering for you, then, were some of the people that were frowning upon your new little thought pattern here, that somehow now you are a works righteousness person, that somehow you have to earn your way to either the kingdom or favor with God?
I think that is the assumption of the majority of people that hear that you're keeping the Sabbath or the feast, or you're doing some other Torah commandment. But that, like you, that was never a confused issue for me. Mm-hmm. I knew I was saved by grace through faith. But then I also knew that he prepared beforehand good works for us to walk in. It was like, let's just finish that set of little verses at least.
Yeah, sure.
in Ephesians, but or that you're in bondage, you're living under the law. So and we know, like when the Lord and this has to just be a complete work of the Holy Spirit anyway, for you to see any of this whatsoever. That this is about relationship, and this is about wanting to serve him in a more complete way, to the best that when you are looking at the word, when you're looking at this, what is it actually saying for me to do? So it's not because I'm afraid of God, or I think I've got to obey to maintain a salvation. No, this is just about relationship.
Yeah.
And it's also about blessing. Mm-hmm. We want to live a blessed life, and living a blessed life doesn't mean what a lot of teachers talk about with just great prosperity and new cars and mansions. That's not what the Bible teaches. But there is a great peace and contentment in my heart by serving him this way.
Yeah. Well, so one of the other people I dialogue with often on Everyday Torah is Heidi Summers. And one of the things that she's covering with me is the idea of intimacy, and she's done a good job of unpacking Genesis for us. And we're still working through that. But one of the things about Heidi is that she's pretty new to walking in the Torah. And I don't want to discredit anybody that comes, like if you're a 2-year Torah walker, that doesn't make anyone less than. A lot of times, no. I got one guy, the other guy, in fact, Jacob, he's pretty new to Torah, but he knew the Bible pretty well. So once he figured out the Torah, snip, snap, he started to see all the puzzle pieces going together. Heidi's the same way. Snip, snap, she just started just running with things, understanding things. It's been neat to be with her. So I saw your website, but one of the things that you have done, you just have the experience. I have, and you know this too, is there's a lot of things that I've been following the Torah, doing what Yahweh's asked me to do. And as I've gone into some of it, I admit some of it, I just like, why am I doing this? I'm not really sure. And so I'll be doing it for a little while, and sometime in the present, future, after I had been doing it, I discover either through experience or connecting something in the scripture, going, oh, that's why God has us do this. Like, oh goodness.
I still have moments like that all the time. I love them.
So my assumption, though, is I think you've had some of those moments with regard to the feast days and the role of men and women, or just understanding men and women. And I want to preface this conversation this way. There's some neat people doing some great stuff with the Torah. They're great teachers. They do a great job. And one of the things that I really want to do on the internet, have discussions about, is I am just convinced that part of the blessing isn't just this, add a boy, add a girl, that Yahweh, I'm so proud of you for doing my instruction. There's actual life that we have in doing this stuff. And my assumption is, and my experience is, that my relationship with Amy is better because of this. My relationship with food is better because of this. My relationship with the seasons, the cycles, the how even how Yeshua embodied all these feast days. My relationship with Yeshua is better because it's like he gave me a blueprint for understanding him and what he did for me. So it's like, and now it's so second nature even for me. I'll see a moon and I'll know where I am in the month cycle. So it's like my whole engagement of how it's almost like if I were to play a wife role in the Bride of Messiah, it's almost like Yahweh, my husband, created this whole universe as a love letter to me. And if he said, if you just pay attention, I'm like talking to you all the time, right?
Yes.
So I feel this in my heart, and I so want to show people that all this stuff that God has given us is designed to cause us to walk in the narrative of the kingdom, to give us more handles by which we fall in love. It's like the more I discover about Amy, my wife, the more I'm just so much more in love with you. And you've told me, as you've done these feast days, you've discovered some things about men, women that are important for us to know. Can you tell us, what are you discovering? You've had a lot of experience here.
Well, I will say this, every single cycle that you follow and you walk through, there's elements that are the same, like the foundation post or something like that, that the feast are rooted in. And yet there's always so much more to learn. And so rather than being boring, like a cycle that it's mundane, you're just dredging through it, it's so exciting because there's just it's like an onion and another little layer is revealed. That shows you just what you're talking about, how to have a deeper relationship, not only with God, but with your spouse, because we are a parable, our relationship, the marriage covenant is a parable of our relationship with him. I mean, I think most everybody, a believer, Christian or Messianic, whoever, they understand that on a surface level, but I want to know it on that heart level. And I think that's what he reveals to us in his cycles. And so if I had to begin, I would just start with, in the beginning with Adam. And when I say Adam, I'm talking about Adam and Eve together as one. They are formed, or he is formed from the ground. Of course, we know she's built from his side, but they're formed from the ground. So there's an aspect of us that is like soil. I think we get that from the parable of the sower with the seed, right?
Mm-hmm.
Well, our sustenance for physical life comes from the ground. And even if you're not a farmer, we depend upon the ground in order to live. Still to this day. I mean, we even talk about our field of work. If you're in medicine, what field of medicine do you work in? It's all about a field. Or in education, what field of education are you in? That sort of endeavor. So we're always out there serving and working in the field to get bread, not just physical bread, but spiritual bread. And so the feast days are, situated around agriculture and specific harvest.
Mm-hmm.
And so when we're bringing in spiritually these things that we're bringing from the ground, our service to God, and even if you're not in ministry, you are still a servant of Yahweh, right? Mm-hmm. You're working in that field. You're a witness for him, even when you're shopping at the grocery store. So that is what we're bringing in from the field to him. And so when you look at the pilgrimage feast, they are the harvest feast. You have Passover and unleavened bread right there together with the barley harvest. Then you have the wheat, and then you have the fall feast where there's fruit, there's wine, there's oil. And so there's a particular spiritual process of sanctification that we go through every year as we're walking through this cycle. So we bring a harvest, but we are the planting of the Lord. We are his harvest. Right. And so as we do that, we're learning not only how to serve him better, but how to serve one another better. And when we look at the 10 commandments, we see this mirrored. I mean, half of them are about serving him and half of them are about serving the other, the one outside yourself that's right here in your face. Right. And so everything is about both of those relationships, the horizontal and the vertical. But what I've discovered with the feast, particularly with men and women, is every time we learn something new about our walk and relationship with Yeshua in keeping his appointed times, because that's what they are. They are moedim, appointed times. Right. They're times of intimacy with him. And so by learning that there needs to be structured time spent with him, we can learn that about how we're supposed to have structured time with our spouses. Okay. Because he's always concerned about both of these two great commandments, loving him and loving our neighbor as ourselves. And that would include your spouse, of course. And so the other definition of moedim is seasons. That's not a coincidence, because the earth, and where we look at this primarily from the perspective of Israel. So no matter where you are on earth, the Bible was written from that vantage point.
Mm-hmm.
You can look at the seasons that the earth goes through, the cycle that the crops go through, and we are going through that cycle. So there is, right now, we're in the month of Elul, the 6th month. We're heading into the 7th month for the fall feast. And that's really when the great harvest is, the oil, the fruit, and the wine. And so if I look outside, where I happen to live in the United States, it's sort of comparable to where Israel is right now. Your little gardens, you're getting those last full, mature, ripe fruits. It's coming in right now. And as we move into that 7th month, you can see how that would be harvest. But what's happening to that plant once it's mature? Some of them are actually going to die and they'll live again through their seeds that they've put out. Some of them, like the trees, will start to lose their leaves. They go through this period where it looks like they're dying, but there's a great work going on the inside of those trees so that they can prepare to then sprout and bud and bloom again in the spring. And so it just goes on and on and on. It's an infinite cycle, because what we're really looking at is the spiritual recreation of us, of man, every single year. And every single year, there's more that needs to be recreated as we are being conformed into the image of Yeshua.
Now I'm having a little epiphany here. It's not like I haven't touched on it, but the way you described it, what it's telling me is there's something deeper than what I had thought of. So usually what I do is when I'm going through the appointed times, it's a way for me to respond to Yahweh's grace by appreciating, by walking in this narrative of what Yeshua has done for us. If you go through those feast days, of course, Yeshua is the centerpiece of all that. And my tendency, and it should be, is on Yeshua. I also knew that when we do Passover, and then in my world we're counting the Omer from first fruits all the way up to Shavuot, and it's clear to me that we are a harvest, and at some point, and at least in my theological framework, there's going to come a point at which there's going to be, and I'm not going to talk right now about the 2 loaves, but these 2 loaves are coming together, and it's definitely about God's people. So I see us as being very important in these cycles. As I think about the fall feast days that are coming up, as I'm thinking to myself that I know that when we do Yom Teruah, that we're a participant, and we're doing Yom Kippurim, that Day of Atonement, I'm fasting, I'm a participant, I'm grateful, and I'm somber too. It's just it's a big day, and then going in. So I see myself as a participant, but the way that you describe the whole cycle is that there is a growing inside of us all the way the year through. And I haven't heard it quite like that before. Did I get it right? Kind of?
Yes, you did get it right, because we are talking about the seed, right? The seed of the woman in us. And so it is constantly, this is really just the Holy Spirit, like I said, working and transforming us into the image of Messiah. And it's not just a one-time thing. It's an ongoing thing. Just like when you look outside in your garden, it's an ongoing cycle.
Yeah.
It occurs every year. And so there's aspects of that process that we learn. And as we get into the fall, and really there's a mirror from that spring and fall side that we can see, where you see themes on the spring side also happening on the fall side. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute, but there's more of an escalation in the fall. We know that when we're looking at the feast, we see fulfillment, Yeshua fulfilling those spring festivals of Passover, unleavened bread, early first fruits, and then of course Shavuot, the bigger first fruits of wheat. We see him doing that in the first century, and yet we're waiting fulfillment for the fall feast. That's usually how it's put. But there's an aspect that we go through even in our personal salvation and walk with him. And then all throughout life, we have a whole life where we're walking and following him. And so what's happening now as we get to the fall feast, and I'm going to start really there. And I know that's a little backwards, but I'm doing that because that's where we are right now. That's what you're seeing happening out in the witness of creation. At least if you're, of course, in the Northern Hemisphere, you're seeing this. So we have Rosh Hashanah, or Yom Teruah, which is the Feast of Trumpets. And there's this awakening blast. As I mentioned before, all those ripe, mature fruits are coming in. So the next stage for the plant life out there is to figuratively die. And amazingly enough, that's exactly how our Jewish brothers in tradition view Rosh Hashanah. It's a change. Shana means year, but it's also the word for change. They wear white to symbolize not just purity and forgiveness for sins, because there's been a season of repentance, but also because they see themselves dying and resurrecting every year at this time. But that's what's going to happen to our plants outside. There's a death that occurs when that full maturity comes to place, and then there's a new life. And Yom Kippur, of course, is tied right into there with it. But Yom Kippur, we could talk about more than any of the other feasts in relationship with men and women. So that's one reason why I started in the fall.
Okay.
Jewish weddings, this is tradition now, but they view their wedding day as a Yom Kippur Katan, and that just means a little Yom Kippur. They even fast on their wedding day because they believe this so strongly, because they see Yom Kippur as the most intimate time between Israel and God, because they had the mediator, the high priest. That was the only time of the year where he would go in to the most holy place. And so you can see the intimacy just with their representative and our representative, Yeshua, going into that most intimate place. And that's what a marriage is. So if we're looking at the high holy days together, Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur together, which I like to view them together because I think they're directly connected in this theme. There's not just a death and a resurrection. That also means there's a new creation. Rosh Hashanah in tradition actually commemorates the creation week. In the creation week, mankind was created on day 6. The 6th feast is Yom Kippur. So that, having the association with the number of man, the day he was created, Yom Kippur has a lot to teach us about not just the different, and I'm doing this completely from a relationship standpoint, not what you are most likely going to read, which is just as important, about the idea of reconciliation, repentance, forgiveness of sins, atonement, covering those sins, but from just the relational point. Because if that takes place, what has it done? It's reconciled us to God. In a relationship with man and woman, it's a brand new creation. So you can see how they're linking these themes together with Yom Kippur, the idea of a wedding. So a bride wears white, and a groom in Orthodox circles anyway wears something called a white kittel. It is like a white robe worn often over clothes. This is the first time he wears it on his wedding day. And it does symbolize purity, like we think of with white, but it also symbolizes that picture of the high priest going into that place of intimacy, and there being a death to an old life and the beginning of a new one. And that is the two, man and woman, becoming one, unified. And essentially that's what atonement does for us between us and God.
Yeah.
But now we're looking at that from a marriage point of view, if that makes sense.
Yeah. I'm following.
I know, it's absolutely incredible. All the different little steps that are within a Jewish marriage, because the way they see it is both the man and the woman, if they're going to have a successful marriage, they have to die to self. And on Yom Kippur, we're told to afflict our nefesh, to afflict our souls, which is most often understood to be a complete cessation of food and water. So you're fasting all day long. Mm-hmm. So they're fasting because they know for them to have a proper relationship with one another, there's a part of themselves that has to be sacrificed. And you can call that your ego. You can call that your lower nature. You can call that our just natural proclivity to wanting to be number one. And we all have that selfishness within us. That has to die for any relationship to really succeed. And so they see that their fasting is mimicking this. It's an understanding that that is what is happening. So they also, you have the bride that's going to, they build a chuppah, which is like, we would call it a wedding canopy, and it has a big tallit, a giant prayer shawl over the top of it. And they're going to go get married under that chuppah. Excuse me. So why under the chuppah? Well, that's a picture of the children of Israel going to Mount Sinai and accepting the covenant. They're hearing the words, which is sort of like a wedding agreement or covenant called a ketubah. And they're saying, I do to the Lord. Mm-hmm. And so when the children of Israel did that, they immediately, unfortunately, started murmuring and complaining while Moses was up on the mountain getting the rest of the commandments. They ended up building the golden calf, just a great, great sin of Israel. Well, when Moses went back up on the mountain to get the second set of tablets after that incident, tradition says that he came back and it was on Yom Kippur. So you're seeing that tie-in, not just with Pentecost or Shavuot, but with Yom Kippur. And so when you see a man and woman, a bride and groom, and they're coming together to become one flesh under that chuppah, it's in commemoration of that covenant. It's a really beautiful picture because they understand them to then be building the house of Israel. You know, that's the whole mandate. They're going to go forward and build. And she will actually, the bride, will go and walk around her husband counterclockwise because that's going to put her right side near the groom, and the right side is considered more spiritual in Judaism. You know, you can look at the right hand, Yeshua sitting at the right hand of God. There's lots of pictures of him being at the right. Yeah. So she'll walk counterclockwise around him. So that right side is going around him. And in some traditions, it's 3 times. And in some, it is 7. And they do that from the scripture in Jeremiah 31, where it talks about a woman will encompass a man. And that happens to be, of course, where we have the new covenant prophesied is in Jeremiah 31. It's a really neat understanding how they're seeing this. But what she's doing spiritually by doing that is, you could think of the people and the priests walking around Jericho 7 times for 7 days. And then what does that do? It tears down walls. And that's what also has to happen for 2 to become one flesh. All the walls, all the barriers that are between the 2 of you need to come down. Again, it's intimacy. That's the goal. Yeah. And so she encircles him. And then there's also a protective nature, because a man protects a woman in one way, and a woman really is protecting her husband in another, because you're a team. You're one flesh. You each have strengths. You each have weaknesses. And the idea is that you want to do this so that you have a strong, healthy relationship that can last until death do you part. Because we were just talking about with those 2 feasts about that death aspect. We want a death unto life. And so there's just this whole idea of surrounding, a theme of being surrounded at a Jewish wedding. But that's really true also of all the fall feasts. There's like a spiritual covering over all of them, whether it's the clouds, whether it is all the coverings that you see in the most holy place on Yom Kippur, or even that picture of the actual wedding feast at Tabernacles or Sukkot, where you're literally under a sukkah again, with the picture of the Lord dwelling in the midst of his people. So really neat connections with Yom Kippur and relationships. I'm actually working right now on a book on the fall feast. And it's not a how-to book, and it's not an introductory book. It really is about what you and I want to discuss. It's the spiritual flow, or the spirit, how it's moving he's moving in those fall feast, and even in the spring feast. I'll be mentioning them because you cannot mention one without the other, really, because like I said, they're mirrors. So then once you finally get to the wedding ceremony under that chuppah, there's 2 steps that take place. One is called kiddushin, and we might translate that as a betrothal, but in reality, it means to be set apart. It has to do with sanctification. Mm-hmm. So there's this sanctification process that goes on where the bride is accepting the ketubah. She's accepting everything that is written thereof, because it is a contract. It's, I will do this, I promise this. We exchange vows sort of in lieu of that in most, I guess, Christian circles would be familiar with that. And then the second part is where they will actually become married. And that one is not that they're not married with the betrothal, because they are. Mm-hmm. It would require a divorce at that point.
Right.
But then you're going to get to that point to where you can actually then go and eventually consummate the marriage. But then there's 7 blessings that are pronounced over this bride and groom. And all of them are not just about this couple, but it's about all Israel, because we become one with our spouse. But there's also a point in which you and I, the entire body, is also supposed to be one. And we're doing that, of course, with Yeshua. That was his prayer for us, that we all become echad, that we all become one. So what is the key to that? It's exactly what Yom Kippur teaches. Sacrifice. It's a self-sacrifice. It's a sacrificial love. And that's where I think you have both Paul and Peter talking about that in the realm of marriages, that being the key. And only after you have that will we get to that thing that most of us desire, especially men, because this is a stronger need for men than women, which is respect. Because respect is more akin to a reverence, an honor. And women do need that too, but men primarily. Yeah. But those two go hand in marriage. And you see them visualized in the feast, especially in Yom Kippur and Sukkot.
So because my brain is always so curious. So I definitely see how you're relating the Jewish idea, Hebrew idea of wedding and connecting the dots there with Yom Kippur, Yom Kippurim. And then I see the overlap that the spring appointed times are not standalone. There's a conjunction between those two. You can, in many ways, I think theologically, we can put the cookies on the bottom shelf and say, the first coming of Yeshua is all wrapped up in those spring appointed times, and he was seeking to make a people for himself, and they did fail miserably. But at the same time, we have this Savior Yeshua who dies as our Passover lamb, raises, and he's making us. But then there's this connection that happens with what is going to happen in the consummation of everything, where she is not, she is, for lack of better words, positionally perfect. She is redeemed by the blood of a lamb, but there's going to come a time, and the total speculation on my part, but there's this, I think it's in Deuteronomy 22, where they present a virginity cloth. And I sometimes wonder if part of what's happening at Yom Kippurim, when the goat dies and the blood is taken into the Holy of Holies, if there's this sense of which he's taking the virginity cloth, presenting it before the Father, saying, I have got my bride, and I am presenting her before you a spotless virgin. I wonder, I don't know, completely speculative. I don't know. I've
never thought about that, but I can see a correlation.
Well, I mean,
there.
I think that's for me too. I see the correlation. I see the possibility, but I'm like you, right? Mm-hmm. We have these ideas, hypotheses, but we're not really sure how it works. I know that a woman has a cycle monthly on purpose, and I have my speculation of why this is, but I'm still trying to connect all the dots. Okay. So here's what
do.
Am I kind of maybe you've thought about this before, right, Kisha, on the monthly cycle? Okay.
Oh, yes.
I thought you had. And if you want to put that in there so I can hear a perspective on that, that would be great. Now, all that said, okay, I'm seeing spiritually the things that you're saying with regard to the ketubah, the I do, and the sacrifice that must happen at Yom Kippur. I get it. Even when I'm teaching on Ephesians 5, and it says, "Hey, man, you better wash your wife in the Word." I tell guys all the time. I said, "Don't sit around and think that means read the Bible to her. It means embody Yeshua. Die to yourself. You be the embodiment of who Yeshua is. And when you do that, then you're someone that's really likable."
Yes. And that is the key. And that's really what we're supposed to learn in the spring, on that spring side of the Moedim. Now, there's lots of neat things that go on every single month. You were talking about the months because they are the governors of really the Moedim. The months are, the moon is that lesser light. Month comes from munth. I mean, even the English word is related to the moon. But so there's a cycle that goes on there. It just gets really big. And I don't want to go too much into that right now. I want to kind of keep it simple.
Okay.
With just the 7 Moedim, but I actually started at the end. So what we were looking at just then, remember what was outside? Mature fruit.
Okay.
So we're looking at something that's far more mature, but our goal is to get to that Sukkot covering, that 7th feast that's mirrored like by Shabbat. So there's completion, in that wedding feast. There's joy, there's wine, there's celebration, there's harvest. And all of that is to get us again to that 8th day of Sukkot, which is a new beginning. And then the scrolls are rolled back. Everything sort of starts all over. That's what's going on outside. Mm-hmm. That's what's going to happen to the soil. Okay. That's what's going to happen to this soil. And then we're going to go all the way back through the winter months. And there's neat things that are occurring there. But then we're going to get back to the spring with the spring feast. And at the time of the spring feast, this is where you would get more to the nitty gritty. And I think this is where most of us get stuck.
Okay.
Where we have issues. And I saw a couple of sessions you did with Heidi. Awesome. Because I really do believe we do need to know the beginning to see what occurred at the fall, to see how we're still falling today. Because I think it's the same scenario over and over again. Mm-hmm. There's nothing new under the sun. And so when we get to Passover, we know that what happened at the original Passover. We know that they had to place the lamb's blood on their doorpost.
Right.
While they were in the darkness and bondage of Egypt. That is like putting their faith and trust in the word of the Lord. He told them to do it, and that's what they were going to do. We see that mirrored in Yeshua being the Passover lamb, and his blood, being the thing that's bringing us redemption from the darkness of bondage of sin and death and all those things. So we see that happening. But when we come to him and we're accepting him, that's essentially what we are doing. How would that correlate to a relationship? Well, if you've got two people and we're starting a new creation, that's really what a marriage is. It's a whole new entity. You're no longer, two, you are one. But in a sense, that old life you both have had, there's a particular type of darkness and bondage that's involved in that. Mm-hmm. I mean, we all say this. We know we bring stuff into the marriage that is not quite.
Yeah.
Some of it's good, but there's a lot of it that's bad, and we got to work through it.
Sure.
Okay. Well, that's the same thing that happens to us when we come to Yeshua. That's the picture of of Passover, but we're essentially walking through the door. And, even a threshold, we even still can have the tradition often where a groom is going to carry his new bride over the threshold. And thresholds, a lot of covenants were made at thresholds in ancient Eastern societies, not just Israel, but in others. So there's an idea there that he's carrying her because they're one starting this new home, this new house, this new family, this new creation. So the feast are now going to teach us then what we got to do. We go right directly into unleavened bread or matzah. In the Exodus, we're told that they did so because they did not have time for their bread to rise. Now, remember, our bread is not just physical sustenance, it's also spiritual. And they didn't have time for it to be leavened. In this case, it would have been a good thing. Leaven is a contronym. It can, most often in the Bible, it is a picture of something sin, something mixed in that shouldn't be there. But there's also leaven of the kingdom, we learn. So there is a good leaven.
Yeah.
So at this stage, all that old stuff, think about the old life these two have had. You don't need to bring that in. You've got to discern where it is. Search for it in your house, in your hearts. And I think that the Torah was brilliant when it said that a man, I think this is Exodus 21. I'd have to look up the reference, but when he takes a new wife, he's not supposed to go out to war. He is not supposed to take a public office. He is actually supposed to stay at his home for 1 year to make his wife happy. Now, I think if we would just follow that commandment, now that doesn't mean you get to everybody can take a year off work. No, right. But the devotion is upon that new creation.
Yeah.
Everything should be about that new creation. And why does he needs to learn what makes her happy. And obviously with a woman, we sort of are more geared to that anyway. I mean, even since the fall, our desire will be for our husband. Our desire is to try to do that with our men, but that's what you both need to do. It's like being in that period of unleavened bread where you've got to figure one another out. What is actually leaven? What's chametz and what isn't?
Yeah.
What needs to go so that we can get to that third feast, which is Yom HaBikarim, which is the early first fruits of barley. So you want to start seeing fruit from your marriage, those very first fruits. That's what you have to do. And unleavened bread lasts 7 days. So that should give us an idea. There's a full cycle here that we need to go through as couples before we're going to get to that new life, that picture of resurrection that we get on that third feast, which is when Yeshua did resurrect. So again, like you were talking about, there's a type of death that is occurring. Matzah does sort of figure that. You are denying yourself a lot like you're denying your complete self at Yom Kippur, but there's a denying of that fleshly nature within matzah. That's what it's training you to do, to look for things that don't belong.
I guess I had never connected the dots in the sense that there is a necessity of having man, woman, marriage, metaphor. You use the word parable, and we have a very live, living crucible by which you're not just doing the way you've described it. We're doing the feast days together as a community, but we're also doing it together as a couple. And I hadn't thought about that. What I thought about is, so Amy and I, and the great news, I've got an A+ marriage. Amen. Awesome. It's so fun and good. Makes me feel so rich as a man. But we do the feast days together, and we do it because we want to respond to Yeshua's grace, and we want to honor our Messiah and walk the way that he wants us to walk. It is for him. But what I didn't pick up on is how important it is for me to identify the yeast in our marriage and household. And we know that getting out the leaven from our houses is that spiritual component. Hey, get the Egypt out, get the sin out, but there's also things in our marriage that could be weighing stuff down. Like if I haven't died to myself all the way, that I've got to identify that in myself in the context of our marriage. And I'm thinking that if I do this all right, and I'm doing it, walking spiritually in all this, that, you would just think that the ecclesia of God's people, the feast days are that much more joyous. Go figure. When marriages are awesome,
yes,
and people are not at each other's throats, and you're feeling like genuine love between that man, that woman in marriage, and they're leading a Seder or whatever it is. It's just, I don't know if you've had this experience. I know that you say all the feast days are amazing, and I agree they are. But I've been through some that, they were tough because the humans involved were not always happy people. I'm just being honest.
Well, you know what, and I think that this is meant to be so, because if we're looking at the pilgrimage feast, the 3 primary feasts on the calendar, there's a type of threshing floor. I mean, the Temple Mount itself, where we would go to bring our offerings, is a threshing floor. So there's an aspect of testing. There are appointed times for sure of intimacy, but with intimacy comes also testing. There's a revealing. And when we see junk like that, that's coming out of us or our neighbor at those seasons, I think it's meant to come out. This is like that chaff that needs to be sent up in the wind to blow away. But we need to be able to recognize that that's what is happening.
Yeah.
And then we need to look at and see, okay, why? What am I not letting go of that I should let go of? That's, initiating a lot of these issues, because they often do happen. I've also, Traver, seen these happen.
Yeah. I know I'm not alone in that.
No, you're not.
I think I'm always careful on that, because I don't want to oversell what I do. Yes, what I do is amazing. Yes, it's good to walk in the way of the Lord. Everything you read about in Psalm 119, I feel all those things as I walk on that path.
Yes.
But as I walk in that with people who are marred, and even myself who is marred, it's work. There's an aspect of it that is work, and I admit that to people. So anyway, so I'm looking at my clock here. We got like a 10, 12 minutes here. You've described for me, which is very helpful. And if you could, I'm so curious. You're talking about these new moons, the lesser light. It doesn't have to relate to marriage or men and women right now, but I got to admit that there's a sense in which when the spring appointed times are done, there's that little stretch, the 50-day stretch, that I kind of keep excited because we're counting the Omer together, and it kind of keeps it going. We have an anticipation up to Shavuot, but there's a sense in which it's like, okay, that's done. It's now dead time to the fall feast. And the way you're describing it, it's not dead time. And
no,
I know that I have this personal relation or a community personal relationship with the Lord that goes on, but there's something that you've brought up here with the lesser light that I want to make sure that I don't miss. Is there something in those new moons on a monthly basis, or anything in there that I'm missing that I shouldn't miss?
Well, I'll tell you, there's so much. So
yeah, I know. Can you? Yeah.
But okay, essentially, every new moon, because, and I don't mean just go look at your Western calendar, because it's going to show you the conjunction, which is when the moon is dark.
Mm-hmm.
And then when you see the first sliver of light, that's technically the new moon,
right,
according to the Bible.
Mm-hmm.
But notice how the moon is going through this cycle like we're talking about. We're talking about a constant cycle of death. And I don't mean that morbidly, because Yeshua walked, the way of life is death. It's just, that's what he showed us. He walked through that. And it's not a death into death. It's a death into life, into new life, unto resurrection. That's what he walked out. That's what essentially what the Moedim are teaching, but the new moons every month you see this as well, because it's going through a cycle where it seems to die. It's dark. And then you have that first sliver of light, which the Jews call the molad, which means birth. So there is a birth of a new moon. And then, of course, we know it's going to wax, it's going to be full, it's going to start waning. And so as it's a reflector of light, you can see how the moon figures us, the bride of Christ. Mm-hmm. So there's this whole cycle that we go through every month. And there's something each one really kind of teaches us as it moves through the seasons. And I think the best way, the most succinct way to kind of look at that is to look at the agriculture cycle in Israel. What is going on in the soil at those times? And you'll sort of get this theme. And what I have found super, super fascinating is that we go through a Torah cycle every year, that starts over at the end of Sukkot. And if you look at the Torah portions that happen to be in your month, they really will sort of show you what's going on in the month spiritually.
Yeah.
Not just one portion you're looking at, you're generally looking at 4. And so it's like there's a broader theme. And I promise, if you pay attention, you'll realize, oh, I'm dealing with that right now in my life. On some level, this is occurring. Okay, so I know that the Father is using that for good, to bring me revelation, to bring me light, to bring me maybe to repentance if that needs to come forth. But all of it is, again, refinement, transformation, conforming me further into the image of Yeshua.
Well, just to be completely transparent, I'll be looking for it now. Because so I've gone through the Torah portion cycle several times. Have I done it every year since I started doing this? No. There have been times where we've gone through the Torah portion cycle and then we're like, okay, we need, because our tendency as a community is we spend most of our time in the Torah, not enough time in the Gospels. And we need to get to, we did a whole study on Acts. I mean, so everything we're doing is legit. And there's no place in the Bible that says, do the Torah portion like this. It doesn't say that.
No.
But what I have learned is that I do not discount, even though my authority is the 66 books of the Bible, to discount the Mishnah, to discount Jewish tradition. We ought not do that. There's a lot of good things that help us understand what's going on in the Scripture. Now, as you talk about that, the Torah portion, which is Judaism, but still, it's a core for who we are as believers. If we don't understand that, we don't understand Yeshua, we don't understand his ministry, and you sure can't understand Paul. So to hear you talk about being on track with those Torah portions, being mindful of the seasons, and Traver, notice in your life what is happening in your life during those phases, because it's going to lead me to a phase there at Yom Kippur, where I'm ultimately going to die to myself and resurrect, like you're talking about. Mm-hmm. I know I'm only paraphrasing. It's just because I'm one of those. I get excited learners. I like, wow, that makes sense to me. Okay, so I need to, if not that everything you've said is immensely practical, but here we have our last 7-8 minutes here, and you've got a man and a woman. They're married. They're going through those early years. They just discovered Torah like you did way back when. They've got family around them going, what are you doing? What are you thinking? And then they start making ham sandwiches right in front of you, just because, we know this irritates you now, and we're going to see what you do and test you and all that stuff. And, you and I'm far beyond that. People already know, okay, that's just how Traver is. And a lot of people, and probably in your life and my life, it's so great. Actually, because it's been over a decade for me now, a lot of people are understanding what I'm saying. And a lot of people know that I'm serious, and a lot of people know that Traver's still saved by grace, and that I haven't abandoned Yeshua, just like you. Yeah. But I've got these people that are brand new to this, And I want to say to them, hey, you're doing these feast days and all that. It's not just helping you walk in the narrative of the kingdom year by year, but it's also helping your marriage in very practical ways. And I think I'd like to answer that. And before I hand it to you for the last word, I want to say that there's something else I saw. So people know that I'm a professor, and I have to read too many non-Bible books, but one of them is called Appreciative Inquiry. And the book is about churches that are old and they've lost their mojo and they're declining. They basically are a decline. They're hiring a consultant, and the consultant comes in, and what in the world do you do? One of the word appreciative inquiry is remember how this whole thing started. Go back to your roots, the fire that was there.
Yes.
It's almost like people that are 10 years, the 7-year itch, but 10 years into their marriage and they're growing tired. You almost want to sit with the couple and go back to why you fell in love in the first place. Remember that fire and pull that into the present. And as you were talking, the cycle, I'm thinking partly what Yahweh did was he is year by year, remember the fire, go back into what I've done for you. It's almost like we never graduate from sacrifice, from threshold, we just don't. And so it's the Father's wisdom in taking us back there over and over and over again. Now the last minutes for you, and it doesn't have to be 7, maybe it's 10, who knows? The last minutes for you, it's, okay, so a man and a woman, they're walking through these appointed times. And because they've listened to this podcast, they certainly understand that there is a dynamic of them going through the feast days together that is important to their marriage. It's important to the whole of the community, because their marriage is like getting better or refined through that process. But I think the overarching question is this happening through osmosis as we stay faithful to the process? Is there any more things that we need to think about? Is there any more aspects of the Torah that play into these appointed times that as I'm mindful to do them? Like, for example, we're not supposed to have sexual intimacy when the female is on her period. Does that play into all this? In other words, that's a very practical thing.
Yeah.
Does it play? How?
Well, you can think of it as a time that the Lord has ordained for you to be separate. So actually it should, in a healthy relationship, make you eager to come back together, because you do have that time apart. And apparently humans need that, or women would not have to deal with this every single month. Yeah. I mean, there's got to be a process of time that he wants us to come away. Now that it's not to deprive anybody, and it's not to make life hard. He obviously knows that we need those periods in order to go back and get some more fire, like you're talking about. No, you're anxious for it. And so that's actually how the Jews look at it altogether when she's in her period of nidah, that it should actually spark intimacy when that time is over. But gosh, there's so much. Like if you were talking about the whole Torah cycle, like what are you going to learn by doing with your marriage? Tons. I learned tons every single cycle. So it's sort of hard to pinpoint, but I would say if you're maybe bring it down to a couple that might be struggling with the relationship. Let's just say that they're having some issues with just intimacy. Maybe they just really don't like each other anymore. That does happen. It does. But are you committed? If you are committed to that covenant and you want to make it work, and both of you want to make it work, I think you have everything that you need by looking at your relationship through the cycle of the Moedim with Adonai. What does he expect at this season? You need to walk through that with one another in commitment. And you need to get on the table everything, like we were talking about with matzah, like chametz, what's here. Often, with women, with men, there's an issue because he's not feeling respected by her, and maybe he's not being respected by her. Why? That would be akin to the spirit of reverence, or yirat Adonai, the fear of the Lord. And it is a reverence in the healthy form, but in the negative form, it's fear. A woman that is nagging and she's afraid of something. What is she afraid of? These things need to be laid on the table. What is going on in your life that is making her feel insecure and afraid? The first thing I would look at is sacrificial love, because I think any woman, if she's loved sacrificially, it's impossible for her not to respect and honor her husband. I just think it's a natural outflow.
Yeah.
I mean, well, let's think about with Yeshua. We know what he did for us. If we know the love he has for us, if we know that he was willing to die for us, yet while we were still in our sin, what does that naturally create in our hearts? Reverence for him. So it's that picture. So yeah, really lots of stuff, Traver, there that would need to be hashed out.
I know. And I totally admit that I have a little bit of scatteredness about myself.
No, I do too, because to me, it's just, there's a lot and it's all connected.
Well, there is. And I think I got my gem today is to see spiritually how important it is for me to go through these appointed times with Amy, with an eye to our marriage. And it's not that if you're single out there, if you're a growing up person, maybe you're 18 or 17 or whatever. It's not that it's still wherever you are in life. I do see that Yahweh did create them male, female, man, woman, and we all participate in that. Even if we're single or not single, we still all participate in that union. Yes. And to hear you talk about that, Kisha, today in those just the intimacy ways, that's something like when I'm talking to Heidi, as you've seen, that's one thing that she does super well is for me, when I tell people I feel like the bride of Messiah, sometimes when I'm talking to a man, it's like there's this wall and they wonder, are you having gender issues or whatever? And it's not like that at all.
Right.
But it's like, I really appreciate too how when he formed man, anthropos, out of the dust of the ground, it's us, man and woman. And when I find myself in woman, it's like that too. It's like we're together. So yes. I see it all, and I'm sorting it out, and to have dialogue partners like you. I really appreciate your time. I'm very grateful. And just to wrap it up here, everyone, I hope that you got a little bit of fire. Me and Kisha, we do what we do because we're lovesick. We're so in love with our Messiah.
Yes.
We want to walk with our Messiah. We are saved by grace through faith, but our lives are not our own, and we want to give our lives completely over to Jesus. Yes. When you read Psalm 119, that's what that psalmist is doing. Boy, his ways are good ways, and we're doing that. So Jesus, Yeshua, our Messiah, walked in that Torah every day of his life. And we, as believers, need to walk in that Torah every day of our lives because we love and honor our Father, but it's because Yahweh gave it to us that the kingdom of God might take root in our lives, in our families, in our communities, and spread out. And that's what we want. And that's why we call it Everyday Torah. I'll see you next time.